In the autumn of 1879, in a remote valley in the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana Territory, a farmer named Elijah Renner kept a secret in his barn for nearly 6 months. The secret was 12 feet 4 inches tall. It had skin the color of weathered parchment, fingers longer than a grown man's forearm, and eyes that Renner described in his journal as older than the rocks themselves. He fed it bread, beef, and well water. He hid it from his wife, from his neighbors, from the traveling preacher who came through that summer. And when the United States Army finally arrived at his farm on October 9th, 1879, Renner had only enough time to write down what the giant had told him in the days before. That journal was confiscated. The giant was taken away in a covered wagon escorted by 22 armed soldiers. Elijah Renner was committed to an asylum in Helena 3 weeks later, where he died in 1883. However, in 1971, a descendant of Renner's discovered a second journal hidden inside the wall of the original family farmhouse. And what was written in that journal has never been published. Until today. Before we go further, hit subscribe and ring the bell. We cover the buried history of the old world every week. The Tartarian record, the mud flood survivors, the forgotten giants. If that interests you, you belong here. To understand what happened on Elijah Renner's farm, we have to go back. Not just a few years. We have to go back to a world that the history books have quietly erased. In the mid-1800s, the American frontier was not the empty wilderness we have been taught it was. The settlers who pushed west into Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, and the Dakotas reported finding things they could not explain. Stone foundations of buildings nobody remembered constructing. Roads paved with a material harder than granite, leading into mountain passes where no city had ever stood. Wells dug with such precision that the original miners assumed they had been built by some lost civilization. And bones, enormous bones. The newspapers of the period are full of these accounts. The Helena Independent, the Bozeman Avant-Courier, the Deer Lodge, New Northwest. They printed reports of skeletons measuring 9, 10, even 14 feet in length, dug up by ranchers, miners, and railroad crews across the Northwest. These were not ghost stories. These were front-page news items, often accompanied by sworn statements from doctors, county officials, and military officers. So when Elijah Renner claimed in October of 1879 that he had been keeping a living giant in his barn, the story was not as outlandish as it would sound today. What made it different was the giant was alive. And it was talking. Renner was not a wild man. He was 46 years old, a Pennsylvania Dutch immigrant who had come west in 1864 after losing his first wife to scarlet fever. He remarried in 1867 to a woman named Martha Voss, a widow with 2 young sons. The Renner farm was modest, about 60 acres of cleared land along the Bitterroot River, with a small herd of cattle, a flock of sheep, and a vegetable garden that Martha tended with the help of a Salish woman named Mary Two Rivers, who lived in a cabin nearby. The farm was isolated. The nearest neighbor was 4 miles north. The nearest town, Stevensville, was a full day's ride. This isolation would matter. According to the second journal, the one hidden in the wall, Renner first encountered the giant on the night of April 17th, 1879. A storm had been moving down from the mountains for 2 days, and Renner had gone out to check on the sheep just before dawn. He found the giant lying in the high pasture, half buried in mud, with what looked like a deep wound in its left thigh. At first, Renner thought it was a fallen tree. Then he saw the chest rise and fall. The giant was not unconscious. It was watching him. Renner wrote that the eyes were what he remembered most clearly from that first morning. They were grey, almost silver, and they tracked him with an intelligence that he immediately recognized as fully human, and yet not human at all. He stood frozen in the rain for what he estimated as 20 minutes. The giant did not move. It did not speak. It simply watched. And then, very slowly, it raised one massive hand, palm up, in a gesture Renner understood instantly. It was asking for help. He went back to the house. He told Martha nothing. He took a sled, 2 heavy wool blankets, a coil of rope, and his old draft horse, a gelding named Gus. It took him until almost midnight to drag the giant down from the pasture and into the barn. The wound on the thigh was the size of a saucer, deep and crusted with something that looked like dark resin rather than blood. Renner cleaned it with carbolic acid and bound it with strips of bedsheet. The giant did not cry out. It watched him work. When Renner was finished, the giant spoke for the first time. The voice, Renner wrote, was low and slow, like stones grinding under deep water, and the words were in English. The giant said, "Thank you. I have been walking for a long time.